Nobody in Dry Hollow ever spoke about Elias Mercer the way they spoke about ordinary men. His name wasn't passed around with laughter inside the general store or mentioned casually after Sunday church. Instead, conversations stopped the moment someone brought him up. Mothers lowered their voices, old ranchers looked away, and children were warned never to wander near Black Creek Ranch after sunset. The ranch stood alone nearly 3 miles outside town, surrounded by cottonwood trees and broken fences that stretched across the lonely prairie. At night, only one lantern ever burned in the large farmhouse, and even that disappeared before midnight. Folks claimed Elias preferred silence because it helped him forget the man he'd supposedly killed years ago. Others insisted he simply hated people. No one knew the whole truth anymore. Rumors had lived longer than facts. What everyone agreed on was this: nobody knocked on Elias Mercer's door unless they had absolutely no other choice. That was exactly the situation Clara Whitmore found herself in on a bitter October evening. Her troubles had started before sunset. Her uncle, Thomas Whitmore, placed his coffee cup on the table with deliberate care. Clara recognized the gesture immediately. It meant he had already made up his mind before speaking. "Matthew Collins asked for your hand this afternoon," he said calmly. Clara looked up from her plate. Matthew Collins was 52, wealthy, and owned one of the largest cattle ranches in the county. Every conversation she'd ever had with him made her feel less like a woman and more like another piece of property he intended to purchase. "I accepted his offer," Thomas continued. For several seconds, Clara couldn't speak. "You accepted? The wedding will be held before Christmas." Her uncle reached for another biscuit as though he had merely discussed the weather. "You'll thank me one day." Clara lowered her eyes, hiding the anger rising inside her. Ever since her parents had died 5 years earlier, Thomas had treated every decision in her life as his own to make. Where she lived. Where she worked. Who she spoke to. Now he had decided who she would marry. That night, while her uncle slept, Clara packed a small leather satchel with 2 dresses, a family photograph, a little money, and the journal her mother had given her before she passed away. She didn't write a goodbye. Some people earned explanations. Others didn't. She slipped quietly through the back door just as the wind began to howl across the prairie. By the time she reached the old county road, cold rain was falling in thick sheets. Her horse struggled through deep mud, snorting nervously every few steps. Lightning flashed across the sky, turning the empty grasslands silver for only a heartbeat before darkness swallowed everything again. Nearly an hour later, the frightened horse stumbled in a washed-out section of the road. Clara quickly climbed down before it could fall completely. The animal had twisted its front leg. "I'm sorry," she whispered, rubbing its neck. She removed the saddlebag and gently freed the horse, hoping it would find its way to a nearby pasture once the storm passed. Now she was alone. The rain soaked her coat within minutes. Wind cut through every layer of clothing she wore, and the darkness became so thick she could barely see the road beneath her boots. Just as exhaustion began to overtake her, she noticed a faint lantern glowing in the distance. A large farmhouse slowly emerged through the rain. Its porch was empty. Its windows were dark except for a single light near the back. Without knowing who lived there, Clara hurried toward the house and climbed the wooden steps. She hesitated only long enough to catch her breath before knocking once. The door opened almost immediately. Standing before her was a tall man with broad shoulders, silver beginning to creep into his dark beard, and steady gray eyes that revealed nothing at all. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Then the stranger looked past her at the raging storm before meeting her eyes once again. "You've come a long way," he said quietly. Only then did Clara notice the weathered ranch brand carved beside the front door. Black Creek Ranch. Her heart nearly stopped. She had unknowingly knocked on the door of the one man everyone in Dry Hollow feared. Clara instinctively stepped backward. I didn't know this was your ranch," she said, rainwater dripping from the edge of her coat. "I only needed shelter for the night." I'll leave if you'd rather I did. Elias Mercer studied her for a moment. There was no anger in his expression, only quiet observation. The creek flooded an hour ago, he replied. You'll never make it back to town before daylight. He stepped aside and opened the door wider. Come in before you freeze. The warmth of the stone fireplace met her almost instantly. The house was simple but remarkably clean. A pair of worn leather chairs faced the fire, shelves filled with books lined one wall, and a cast-iron kettle simmered gently over glowing coals. Nothing about the room resembled the home of the monster people described. Elias placed another log onto the fire. You can dry your coat there. Clara hesitated before hanging it near the hearth. You've heard the stories, Elias said without looking at her. She remained silent. They're usually the first thing people think about when they see me. I've heard them, Clara admitted. And yet you still knocked. I didn't know whose house this was. For the first time, the corner of his mouth almost formed a smile. I suppose that makes tonight an exception. He prepared 2 cups of hot coffee without asking another question. They drank quietly while the storm battered the windows. Neither tried to fill the silence. Oddly, Clara found it comforting that they're usually the first thing people think about when they see me. I've heard them, Clara admitted. And yet you still knocked. I didn't know whose house this was. For the first time, the corner of his mouth almost formed a smile. I suppose that makes tonight an exception. He prepared 2 cups of hot coffee without asking another question. They drank quietly while the storm battered the windows. Neither tried to fill the silence. Oddly, Clara found it comforting. Morning arrived beneath gray skies. The storm had ended, but muddy water still rushed through Black Creek, carrying broken branches downstream. Just after sunrise, a neighboring ranch hand rode up to the property. The bridge collapsed during the night, the young rider called from his horse. County says it'll take at least 3 days before wagons can cross. Elias thanked him with a nod before returning toward the porch. Clara already understood what the news meant. I've become your guest longer than I intended. You've become stranded, Elias corrected calmly. That's different. He pointed toward the upstairs hallway. There's a spare room. The lock works from the inside. She looked at him, surprised he had mentioned the lock. I'm telling you, he continued, because I don't expect strangers to trust rumors, or me. Something about those words eased a worry she hadn't realized she was carrying. Thank you, she said softly. The next 2 days settled into an unexpected routine. Elias repaired damaged fences while Clara swept the porch, cooked simple meals, and organized the cluttered kitchen. He never expected her to help. She simply disliked sitting idle. When he returned for lunch on the second afternoon, he paused in the doorway. You rearranged everything. I hope you don't mind. Instead of complaining, he opened a cabinet, found exactly what he needed, and nodded. It's easier now. It wasn't much. Yet somehow those 3 words meant more than extravagant praise ever could. Later that afternoon Clara wandered into a small room at the end of the hallway. 3 tall bookshelves covered every wall. History. Poetry. Law books. Even medical journals. She gently pulled one from the shelf. I wasn't expecting this. You expected rifles? Elias asked from the doorway. She laughed before catching herself. A little. I own those too. His answer was so unexpectedly dry that Clara couldn't help smiling. For the first time since leaving home, she laughed without forcing it. That evening they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie gold. After several quiet minutes Clara finally asked the question that had followed her since arriving. Did you really kill someone? Elias kept his eyes on the horizon. No. The answer came without hesitation. There was a rancher named Owen Barrett. He was stealing water from smaller homesteads during a drought. One widow refused to sell her land. He paused. When Barrett threatened her family, I stopped him. What happened? He left town. Then why does everyone believe something worse? Because fear travels faster than truth. Clara looked at the man beside her. He wasn't dangerous. He was simply a man who had accepted loneliness rather than defend himself against endless gossip. Before either of them could say another word, both noticed a rider slowing near the road. The stranger stared toward the ranch house for several seconds before turning his horse back toward Dry Hollow. Clara's smile disappeared. Someone had seen her. And news always traveled fast in a town that loved rumors. The following afternoon, the sound of approaching horses echoed across the open prairie. Clara looked up from the porch railing and immediately recognized the riders. Her uncle, Thomas Whitmore. Beside him rode Matthew Collins, dressed in an expensive black coat, his polished boots gleaming despite the muddy road. Two ranch hands followed close behind. They found me, Clara whispered. Elias stepped onto the porch beside her. He didn't ask if she wanted to leave. He simply waited. The horses stopped outside the gate. Thomas climbed down first. There you are, he said firmly, as though she had wandered away from home for an afternoon. Gather your things. We're leaving. Clara remained where she stood. No. The single word hung in the quiet air. Thomas frowned. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. Matthew finally spoke, forcing a smile that never reached his eyes. Miss Whitmore, people make foolish decisions when they're frightened. Let's put this unpleasantness behind us. I wasn't frightened when I left, Clara answered. I was finally thinking clearly. Thomas took one step toward the porch before Elias calmly moved between them. You'll stop there. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Thomas glared at him. This is family business. It became my business, Elias replied evenly, the moment she asked for nothing except a safe place to stay. I never asked him, Clara interrupted quietly. Both men looked at her. He offered. Silence settled over the yard. Thomas shook his head. He's filled your mind with nonsense. Elias folded his arms. I've barely spoken more than 100 words to her. For the first time since arriving, Clara noticed something remarkable. Elias wasn't trying to convince anyone. He wasn't arguing. He wasn't trying to win. He was simply standing beside her, allowing her own voice to matter. Something she had never been given before. She stepped forward until she stood beside him. I am not returning. Thomas stared at her in disbelief. I raised you. You gave me a roof. I protected you. You controlled me. His jaw tightened. I'm choosing my own future now. The words landed harder than shouting ever could. Even Matthew seemed to understand the conversation was over. He adjusted his gloves, climbed back onto his horse, and looked toward Thomas. There's no marriage without her agreement. Thomas looked at Clara one last time. The anger slowly faded into reluctant acceptance. I hope you know what you're doing. So do I, Clara answered honestly. Neither of them spoke again. The riders turned their horses and disappeared down the long dirt road until only drifting dust remained behind them. For several moments neither Clara nor Elias moved. Finally she let out a slow breath. I suppose the whole county will be talking by tomorrow. They were already talking yesterday, Elias replied. She laughed softly. I suppose that's true. The bridge reopened 2 days later. Clara packed her satchel before sunrise. Elias was already waiting in the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee. I won't ask you to stay, he said. She nodded. I know. He slid a folded ledger across the table. I've never been very good with accounts. She looked at him curiously. The ranch needs someone who understands numbers better than I do. You mean, employment? I mean a fair wage. No promises. No expectations. Only if you want it. Clara looked through the kitchen window toward the wide fields glowing beneath the morning sun. When she had left her uncle's house, she thought freedom meant reaching another town. Now she realized freedom meant having the right to choose where she belonged. She slowly placed her packed satchel back beside the chair. I'll stay. Not because she had nowhere else to go. But because, for the first time in years, the decision belonged entirely to her. Months passed. She managed the ranch accounts while Elias expanded the herd. They worked side by side through changing seasons, learning each other's quiet habits without ever trying to change them. Friendship became trust. Trust slowly became love. The following spring, beneath a sky as clear as polished glass, they exchanged simple vows before a handful of neighbors who had finally learned that rumors were not always truth. As the ceremony ended, Elias gently took Clara's hand. This time, she reached for his first. People in Dry Hollow talked about their marriage for several weeks. Then, like every small town, they found another story to chase. But the happiest story was never told in the general store. It was written quietly each morning inside Black Creek Ranch, where two lonely people built a life founded not on fear, obligation, or gossip, but on respect, choice, and unwavering kindness. Sometimes the safest place in the Wild West wasn't the town that welcomed you. It was the lonely ranch everyone warned you never to enter.